All right, so here we go. Ease into my chair here a little bit. When we look at American history, for generations, we've had a tendency to glorify every choice that we've made. It's almost taboo in some situations to speak negatively about the place we call home and the choices that we as a society have made over time. In 2021, there's more movements today that really push that threshold to say we've made mistakes. We're going to make mistakes and trying to right historical wrongs. We see this frequently, notably in recent years through the different forms of protests that have taken place throughout the United States. Immediately, many people think to the Black Lives Matter movement, but there are others out there. There are others such as the protest for the Keystone XL pipeline that took place in the Dakotas. Go ahead and look it up. It's a very fascinating story. And other events for other people groups. So a lot of the mistakes, because that's what we have to call them, the poor choices that the United States has made historically tends to be against or in harm of a minority people group. Now, that terminology is very broad, it's very ambiguous, but it's also very true. We have to own our past. Does that mean that we sitting here in 2021 are guilty of the sins of our forefathers? No, not necessarily, as long as we're proactive about it. I give you this introduction because today we're really focusing on arguably one of the biggest faults of the United States pre-Civil War. And it's historically referred to as the Trail of Tears. It's also referred to as the Indian Removal Act. And the reality in the short story is this. The United States grouped up Native American nations, removed them from their homeland, and transported them to a different land and said, this will work for you. That's the down and dirty version. There's a lot of speculation. There's a lot of unknowns. In some instances, some believe that 400 Native Americans were killed during this process. Some say 4,000. Some historians argue that 4,000 is on the low side. Understand that prior to all of this, when we focus on the Native Americans, a lot of times in the Trail of Tears, we do get focused on the Cherokee Nation. Understand that these groups of people were full-fledged nations. They were fully developed. They had a form of government. They had a society. They had a hierarchy. They had norms. They had businesses, industries, languages, publications. This is not your stereotype of what's been portrayed over the years. This was a full-fledged civilization. And the United States removed them from their homes and marched them to a different location, which is now present-day Oklahoma. When we look at this, we have to remember a few things. As I stated earlier, we have to first recognize the mistakes that were made, obviously. The other thing we have to recognize, though, is just because an individual was within the United States as a citizen does not necessarily mean they were in favor of the Indian Removal Act. It is critical, especially in 2021, to recognize that it is unwarranted to group people together based on anything. I can't group somebody together and say they're racist because of the color of their skin. I can't assume that all citizens of the United States hated the Native Americans. And you're going to find out today, as we go through some research, that there were allies. There were people, U.S. citizens, fighting for the Native Americans during this process. This is not, it's not a good point in American history. A lot of classes, a lot of history classes get caught up in the world wars, you get caught up in the Civil War, you get caught up in this conflict where it tends to appear, at least, that the United States emerges a hero, whether that's the case or not. The question this time, when we analyze this aspect of history, is simply put, can a villain redeem itself? Because in this instance, we're the villain. The United States is the bad guy. And it sounds really negative, and it is really negative. But as historians, it is so critical that we're able to view a society in both their good and bad features. If we could view the ancient Spartans as these amazing warriors, and at the same time their society was a mess because of what they did to their children for training, we see the good side, but we also recognize the bad side. How can we not do the same for our own people, for our own civilization, for our own society? A true historian, a true social scientist is caught in this awkward position because we have to view equally the good and the bad of a people group. So, as you investigate the Indian Removal Act and the Trail of Tears, the questions that I want you to ponder inside your head is, 1, was this avoidable? 2, if it was, what was the alternative option? And finally, in 2021, so many people still do not know about this. How do we give a voice to those from the past? Good luck.